In this reflective video presentation, I will discuss how my creative pieces, Song Lyric Zine, and a collection of poetry, push against the beliefs held by Western psychiatry, particularly R.D. Laing and his understanding of a schizoid being, as well as forms of resistance against social constructs and particularly what constitutes as mad. This presentation will be focusing on the zine and the poems in relation to each other, in a chronological way to mirror the physical format of the zine. However, I want to suggest they should be seen as an assemblage of ideas and connections, as the inspirations for both are not linear. This is because one of the theories we studied on the module was rhizomatic structures, inspired by Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus. A rhizomatic structure echoes the structure of a real rhizome that's on the screen, being non-hierarchical and intertwined and connected with each other. Although each element can and will be dismantled through this presentation, my making process and accumulation of ideas aren't as simple as this means this or that means that. They're not directly equal to each other. For this reason, please consider my work as an assemblage of what I have learned on this module overall, intertwined with my own personal experiences. Firstly, I wanted to talk about the making process of the zine because I chose to make it inspired by Hell Yeah Self-Care Workbook by Meg John Barker. In her zine, Barker draws inspiration from Black feminist writer Audre Lorde. She quotes, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." Barker explains that self-care can be an act of resistance through thought bubbles. One reads, "Pausing from self-care means I pick my battles more carefully, so I have the time and resources to engage in ways that are most likely to make a difference. So my decision to do something I enjoy is a way of picking my battles and actively choosing to do something I find relaxing, so I have the energy to focus on my dissertation, which is something I need to do and want to have the energy to do. If I decided to make something I hated doing, then I would be burnt out, exhausted, and unable to socialise with others, let alone sit down and write 8,000 words. Equally, by choosing to sew and work with fabric, I am actively pushing against the notion of gendered roles and skills. I was particularly drawn to Anne Sexton's poem Housewives, where she describes the woman marrying the house rather than the husband, because she is expected to look after and care for it. She becomes one with it. It is a disassociation between the object and the person, much like the themes of domesticity, which novels such as Jane Austen's Emma are filled to the brim with. Take a look at my black-out poetry on the first page as homage to Sexton's poetry, as a way to reclaim notions of domesticity. This is also why the front page is fabric and tied with ribbon, as it echoes a containment much like the women inside the house, and then when it is opened, it becomes alive. Additionally, in her zine, Barker argues that it's also important to practice just being. Just being is the act of not doing what society tells you is productive. In Kalinski's journal article, which explores the link between societal structures and the meaning of productivity, he argues that the development of productivity is one of the most sensitive and interesting indicators of the state of capitalist production. As such, by creating something which has no monetary or domestic value other than for my own enjoyment, I am pushing against this pressure to be productive, which again is an act of resistance against capitalism and also the patriarchy. This is because the making of the zine doesn't really serve anyone but me. Now I'm going to move on to talk about the lyrics and the poetry themselves. I felt inspired to create two different ways of portraying the same events because of the disassociation I feel between how I express myself and how I actually feel. But it got me thinking, what's the difference between lyrics and poetry? And why do I feel like my poetry could be more confessional and therefore feel more real? Although my zine states that it is a confessional fusion, I feel like the lyrics are more light-hearted and humorous, and the poems are more depressive and more raw. To unpack this, I turned to the Creative Writing Handbook and Bailey Shea's book, Lines and Lyrics. The handbook suggests that this difference in emotional tone might be because of the simpler language in comparison to more complex metaphors that you can use in poetry. Whilst I agree with this, in Lines and Lyrics, Bailey Shea plays devil advocate and asks if lyrics are even important if the tune is all that listeners remember. So do my lyrics carry any weight or not? I would say that either way, it doesn't particularly matter because I create lyrics as a reparative self-care act of processing my emotions. But In the same vein, they also inspired my poetry, so they are also vehicles for further creativity. And to me, that makes them equally as important as the poetry themselves. Moving on, in the Songlines and Poetry chapter in the Creative Writing Handbook, it reads, "You can't help yourself. You hear the whole thing in your head. It happens at once. You hear not only the instruments and melody, but an expressive human voice." This is talking about the remembering and reimagining the music that you've heard. However, if you remove the context of music, then someone like R.D. Laing would diagnose you as schizophrenic. This is very much like Connie, Marge Piercy's protagonist, in Women on the Edge of Time. You read the whole book believing Connie's perspective, being privy to the same hallucinations and experiences, and then at the end of the novel, there is a clinical summary of Connie's history of mental illness, and the suggestion that her time travelling to a better world was because she was a paranoid schizophrenic. From this, readers can understand the realness of Connie's reality, but are still left questioning the writings from the clinical summary. Aggressive and threatening, these aren't the words that I would use to describe the Connie that I've read about. In this sense, my song lyrics aren't just transporters to the last moment in time where you listen to the lyrics, they are also a version of hearing things that aren't real. This is why I've included little snippets on each page of the zine which add up to a sentence about reality. Piercy has me questioning my reality, and since some of the song lyrics are fictional, you should also question the realness of the lyrics. I have also included QR codes of me singing the lyrics, so you can listen to the melodies and discover if you hear my voice even when the QR code is not playing. My first poem and lyrics are inspired by the disassociation I feel with myself and the different versions I have of myself in different situations, as well as the anxiety I have around other people's perceptions of me. I talk about devils, auras, and the anxiety of over-rhyming, even though I didn't mean to. Particularly, I chose to open up about my own experience with confusions around the self because R.D. Laing's Western psychiatry perception of his subject, David. From the understanding of psychiatrist and psychoanalyst R.D. Laing, a disconnect with reality, like not understanding who you are or what you saw, could be diagnosed as disassociation or depersonalization. In The Divided Self, R.D. Laing refers to the split between the inner self and the outer self, particularly using his example of a borderline case. David is described as having a false self and an own self, and that he would modify parts of himself to be more likable and appeasing to the people around him. I don't think that this makes David mad, like R.D. Laing tries to suggest from his introduction, where he explains that he is representing different versions of madness and making mad comprehensible. Hence the lovely image of R.D. Laing on the slide, because he thinks he can see things that other people can't through his spiritual third eye, but I don't think he really can. This is why I created a mirror in my zine, because it represents this fragmented and confused idea of the self. This is actually on the second page, but they both link to this idea of disassociation. If you actually look into it, you can see someone who you know is yourself, but also doesn't look like you at all, or you can see pieces of yourself. The lyrics themselves are inspired by the fairy tale Snow White, and the idea is that through the smashed mirror, I can finally see what everyone else views of me as, pre-calculated and purposely evil. I don't think this is disassociation and understanding of having multiple selves should be considered insane or mad, but rather that you're more perceptive or anxious about how you are perceived by others. Now, I don't think that I am a schizoid individual like R.D. Laing tries to pin on to David as having difficulties with his emotions and purposely changing himself. That's why I included the wine glass, because I think alcohol can definitely change your perception and understanding, and I sort of separate myself into two categories, a drunk self and a normal self, and the way I act is very, very different. I sort of become a completely different person. Additionally, many neurodiverse people may disassociate and view the world in a different way due to heightened anxiety, and as Rubin explains in her chapter Disassociation in Autism Spectrum Disorders, an unrecognized symptom. Neurodiversity is often linked to anxiety, and anxiety is often linked to dissociation, depersonalization, or derealization. Whilst I'm not trying to suggest that mental illnesses don't require treatment, perhaps using modern terms such as neurodiversity will push against the stigma around madness and mental health. This is just a quick interjection to say that I spent a whole day deciding whether it was worth it to smash a zine. To smash a mirror for 7 years bad luck, a superstition which is normal and everybody follows it, but nobody knows exactly where it came from, at least I didn't. So apparently it came from the ancient Greece and the Roman Empire because reflected images were thought to have mysterious powers. So if you smashed it, you would let go of this mysterious power, and you would then subject yourself to 7 years bad luck. This reminds me of 1984 and George Orwell. So I will go to the next slide. So for this poem and lyrics, I drew inspiration from Orwell's 1984 because the protagonist must fight to maintain his version of reality, and he is represented as mad whilst everyone else is represented as sane. I got reminded of it in a lecture where we were encouraged to see the psyche as a collaborative act and the mind as collaborative too. This reminded me of Freud's herd instinct, where people believe the majority just because there has more numbers or than the other opinion or belief. Freud states that opposition to the herd is as good as separation from it, and therefore is anxiously avoided. This is very similar to the belief systems that people believe in, such as superstitions and the mirror. It is something which utilises fear as a way to control people, like in 1984, and the never ever seen but still believed in Big Brother figure, and the idea that somebody can hear your thoughts and the containment of that, and the madness of that containment. This reminds me of Foucault's book, Discipline and Punishment, where he talks about the concept of thinking that somebody is always watching, particularly in prisons, so that you do not misbehave. Foucault calls this the panopticon, which is essentially a tower where you are told someone is in there at all times, but it wouldn't really matter if no one was there because as long as you thought someone was there. For me, this is an example of maddening, paranoia, and mind control. To relate it to myself, I linked this maddening idea to the modern idea of online dating and the erasure that happens when you stop communicating as if it never existed in the first place. It's like the app is always there, always watching, always scouring for the next person, but then they just disappear like Big Brother. They were never there. The ideas of different realities is something which has inspired the lyrics Little Me, Me, Me and the poetry. The lyrics are reminiscent of a conversation and rising frustration, and the poetry explains why I was frustrated and what happened to trigger a song fragment like this one. It is such a mundane task to open the door to a postman, yet my anxiety and disassociation amplified the situation. Anxious thoughts like Connie's, David's, and in 1984 create a paranoid state of constant stress and discomfort for me, and that is why I wrote the poem and the lyrics in such contrasting ways. Two different realities and two different versions of events. Something which permeates throughout my whole poetry and lyrics are Padgin's book, The Snow Globe, and Sylvia Plath's collection of poetry, Ariel. Firstly, Padkin perfectly captured her sense of urgency and the want to understand the world around her in The Snow Globe, especially with dimensions of cosmology. That is also why the zine is full of star stickers, by the way. Her sense of reality then and her grasp of reality now, and the want to hang on to the normal reality, the one where everyone else is, without experiencing postpartum psychosis, was so powerful and vulnerable. I relate to the want to orientate oneself according to the world around you. The first poem she read to us was Insanity. My mind blew open so wide I couldn't trust the sun to set. I knew then we were going to somewhat understand what she felt like. In my poetry, I hope you get the sense of urgency, anger, and confusion and fear with trying to navigate the world around me. That is why I also recorded them, because I think that they are so much more powerful being read out loud, like what Padgin did, than when you just read them on the page. I think it's because it's coming from the person's whose experiences it was, rather than you yourself reading it. Um, Particularly the first line from The Yellow Devil was directly inspired by Cagdin. It's, tell me, why does the world always rotate the same way and Mars, Saturn and Venus and the moon all look the same? I wanted to reflect how I feel like I'm a marble being rattled around in a jar when people question and judge my morals and decisions as if they don't know me at all, creating different versions of myself. Secondly, Sylvia Plath's poetry also inspired me through her poems, particularly Poppies in October. In her poem, I can feel a sense of anxiety about who she is, where she is, and what she is. There is a feeling of her want to cling on to something tangible whilst battling with life and death. There is a gift which is utterly unasked for, as if she's in a hospital room, which is like the Northern Woman in the Ambulance, with dying flowers given to her, but when also, in doing so, the flowers have had to be killed, that these late mouths should cry open. This concentration on the world around her and how she kind of projects her own thoughts on inanimate objects inspired my last poem, An Encounter with Death. The event itself was inspired by a rhizomatic walk. I was trying to clear my mind of any real objective so that I could return and continue creating song lyrics. I found myself walking alongside a graveyard, and I was fascinated with how alive the place felt. It was quite a strange out-of-body experience, like a time-travelling Connie and a struggling with sense of self David and a hallucinating disassociation that Lang describes his schizophrenic subjects as. So this poem kind of sums up my experience on the module as a whole. To quickly conclude, I haven't been able to talk about all of my inspirations, just the main ones, because I could go on and on and on forever, but the presentation is definitely long enough. So thank you for listening and being patient with me.